Hey, this is Jason with Holy City Hunters, and this is my Swamp Witch theme for 2020. This is my first attempt at a cauldron creep. I made her into a witch. She's kind of the main focus of the entire haunt this year. She sits out in front of her shack. She's out in the bayou, and this was pretty simple. Standard cauldron creep with the foam around the bottom, Christmas lights on the inside. It's kind of suffered a little bit of damage the past couple of days, but you couldn't tell it at night. I had her running with lights on the inside of the cauldron. Maybe next year I'll add a little more to it, just so that there are some things moving around inside the cauldron. I guess one of the things I noticed was with all the lights that were out here, putting her in anything dark really didn't have her show up, so I had to choose lighter colors, like this skirt, purple dress. I used 3/4 inch PVC so that she'd actually have a little more movement in her, and she was set a little down so that when I put the stick in the cup, it would push her forward, and that would get like a moving forward motion as she stirred the cauldron. And I just used a mask. It's just attached to a PVC tube that's on the top. Long as it looked good forward, I didn't worry too much about the way the back of the head looked. So inside I'm using a wiper motor control board and the power pack from Monster Props. It's mounted just to a piece of wood across the bottom of the cauldron here. This is just a plastic cauldron. And then I drilled a hole to run the wiring outside. There's just a strip of LEDs in there that I had on for Halloween. It was kind of a last minute thing. I didn't drill any additional holes, but I'll do some changes to it for next year and try to incorporate those inside the cauldron better. You still couldn't see it, but it did add a little bit of a glow up from the cauldron onto the bottom of her face. She was really throwing a lot of kids because a lot of kids thought she was actually a real person and not an animatronic. The hardest thing though was trying to find clothes that would actually fit it and cover it. I tried to make it somewhat life-size, but a little bit shorter, and to match the scale of everything else that was here. But trying to get a dress over a wire and PVC frame, it isn't always easy. You kind of have to get a couple of things and try it to see if it'd work. And then of course inside on this arm is just the shortcut PVC and zip ties so that it articulates, and there's pool noodles wrapped across here just to give the arm some volume, both here and there. I had the stuffer in here with some burlap just to kind of cover this all up. And then the rest of it is just a wire mesh frame covering the rest of the body. You can see the arms, the articulating arm on the inside there, and how it was attached to the frame with 2 bolts on that side. The motor had to be taken apart. I had to drill 2 holes in the back and then go through the frame here, put some lock nuts on it, and then sealed the motor back up on the inside. And then I just used some aluminum stock there from Lowe's. This is the witch's shack, and the theme for this year was a swamp witch, specifically from the bayous in Louisiana. And so I looked at a lot of different photos of fish shacks and stuff that were in Louisiana, and then kind of drew out one that would work, that I could kind of scale to a bit. I wanted to stick to kind of standard sizes without having to cut a lot. So the bottom portion is 8 foot tall. The top piece from here up is 4 foot tall for a total of 12 by 12. And then this porch is an 8 foot stretch along the main portion here. And when we go around back, it'll make a lot more sense. And this piece up top just sits on top of the main runner of this 8 by 8 square, which is actually 2 panels. And you can see, if you look close, that it splits along the center board of this door here to blend it in so that you can't see that it was actually there. The only time that you can see the split is just at the top and up to the top of the porch here. Now this roof section is just a tattered piece of foam, and it was spray painted too. All of this was done using a burn tool, some paint, and one of the wood grain tools to cover it. It was done in black and then rolled white on top of it, and then the wood grain tool was done. Burning it didn't take any time. You just have to be really random about it. Around the door and up here on the roof, for anything that needed to stand out more, I used a thicker attachment to the wood tool and did kind of double passes on it to make it deeper and wider so that it would stand out more versus just the wood pieces, or the wood planks that went along the front of the building. And the front porch of this is actually structural support so that wind doesn't knock it forward, and there's supports along the back to keep it so that it doesn't fall backwards. But basically it's just all attached to one 12-foot 2x4 at the very bottom, and then everything is bolted on top of it and bolted together. So this is the back of the structure where you can see how it's put together. These are just 2x2s to keep it all light so that it's not really, really heavy. 2x4 by 12 along the bottom, and then I've put bolts in between each of the panels and along the main runner at the bottom, and then along the top here where this top piece sits. And then it just sits up here, two screws, and you can actually lift the whole thing up. And the roof panels, a little bit thicker foam. Each one's got a screw in it. They overlap each other and they come off pretty easy. There's a window up there which is open. It's got a support beam behind it. And then I cut this window in here so that if I choose, I can hang some hollow material and do a projection, or even have another animatronic back behind this window here. But this season, all I did was run a light back here, and it was simple, just a curtain split in half, piece of wire across the top here to hang. Now these 2x4s keep the whole building from wanting to come backwards in case there's any wind, and they're just point dug into the ground and then screwed into the back of the main braces on these panels here. And so they're just 1, 2, 3, 4x8 panels with that one a little cut off, and then 4 at the top. You can pull all of it down and store it pretty easy. Had to keep that in mind as I have limited space on where to store things, so had to be able to come down and stack easily without taking up too much space. So for sound, we got a Bluetooth box inside of here which ran audio to a speaker that was up here. It just pumped out some basic swamp sounds, crickets, frogs, water splashing, that kind of thing. The front part of the yard, because I'm on a slope, what I decided to do is that from the mid-yard back would be the actual scene. And I had all this space in the front to cover, and so the idea was to create a swamp in this area with swamp water that would fill all of this, at least half of the whole scene, to give the effect that it was all water out there and you were looking out across the water at the fish house or the swamp witch's house up on the hill. In order to do that, I mounted lasers across 4 different posts in the front, and then I have this corrugated tube here that I drilled 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch holes every 8 inches in it, and put a fog machine down on the end that was set to low speed, constant run, and it slowly pumped fog out of the small holes in the tube and into the plane of the lasers that were mounted in front of it. At night, it gave the swamp water effect that looked quite impressive, and really, it worked really well. So these are green line lasers that I picked up. I used 4 across the yard, and I mounted them to these posts behind the main fence here so that people wouldn't jar it and knock them out of alignment. Backside was painted black. They mounted up here and shot the laser out across the yard. Since the angle of the yard is that it's not terribly high to get level, if that makes any sense. About 1 foot up would line up straight across to the bottom of the landscaping up there. And so when the fog started to pump out of here, as it creeped down the yard, it would thin out and look really cool as it approached the lasers. one of the things about the fog is most of the time when you use lasers to create that kind of effect, it seems that a haze juice works a lot better, but that's mostly in indoor applications. Outside, it appeared that the fog juice worked a lot better because the wind would typically thin it out pretty easily. If it's too thick though, it will block the laser from being able to light up anything past where the densest part of the fog is. So it's important to spread the fog out like I did with the tube here so that it doesn't get too dense in one area and block the light. These were easy. This was just a jar with some Dollar Tree netting on it. I hot glued it on. When I folded it over the top, I just hit it with a lighter and it burned it back. And then I threw cheap little Dollar Tree candles on the inside, the little teacup candles. And the glass I actually sprayed with, you can get this stuff at the big box stores and it's for frosting glass. All I did was like spray one coat on the outside. I had them flipped over on the driveway. I sprayed it once on the outside and then put that over the top of it whenever they were dry, burned it, and then hot glued it into place. And then I tied some Dollar Tree, dollar store string around it, knotted it, tied it, and screwed it to these posts. And these posts are just landscape timbers that I cut in half, and then I just randomly hit with some black and some brown, and then kind of dusted the top up here with green, and then sprayed some adhesive on top and put some moss up here so that it would look a little more aged and a little more real, because they were very new looking wood whenever I first got them. These were some big LED lights that I got online, and they weren't too expensive. They're made by Ulster. They're 60 watt IP66 lights, and they were actually back down to half of their full brightness for Halloween last night. Normally I keep them at full brightness, but I don't always keep the witch out. She only comes out whenever it's time to really put on the show. But these were great. Normally, years previous, I've had the standard clamp light with like a flood bulb in it or a regular bulb, but these were cool. These are really light up the very top of this tree, and I'm trying to figure out other ways that I can use them now, but 2 was enough. I mean, they put out a lot of light. And I intentionally did not put any light on the witch because she was kind of in the cross section of these 2 lights. So on one side she was getting hit with purple, on the other side she was getting hit with this teal color. And it really created like some cool dynamic lighting in her face and on her dress, and she was throwing weird shadows, and there was not really any dark spots, but there was a lot of color shadows. If one arm blocked something, then the other color would be back behind it, lighting it up. So I thought about putting a light specifically on her, and when I put her out here, she was picking up lights from both of these, it just worked out better. A little bit of light inside the cauldron wasn't bad to get some up light for the chin, the neck, and kind of around the eyes. But these lights handled lighting her up pretty well. And I didn't even bother to anchor them into the ground. I just kicked the backs on them and sat them under these trees and tried to get a lot of up light. But it was enough too to light up the whole scene in the back. And originally I thought that I was going to have some kind of lights along the front to throw light back there, but these worked out really well because they put enough light on it, with the white paint, that it was well lit up, but it was also a little dimmer in the back, and that kind of helped with perspective looking back. You could tell it was much farther back from her, and that plays into the whole scale of the set because it was it's maybe 1/5 scale to how a normal house would be. You could look at my house in the background and see that's the height that would have been if it were real. So with her being a little shorter, it being a little smaller, and it's only maybe 8 feet back from behind her, 8 to 10 feet, I didn't feel like I needed to add any extra lighting to it. I used some standard clamp lights just to do some uplighting in the trees, but that was all that I really needed for this year. I went with green for these back here. I had a teal color in one tree up front and a light purple in the other tree. And that was the majority of my lighting. Now in the window behind, or in the smaller window in the shack, there was an orange light to kind of give a candle look. I had a small candle in the upper window, and then on a lantern out front, which you can see right here. just to add some depth to the scene. The jack-o'-lantern was actually wired back and lit up, but that was all the lighting that I used out here. So this is my Voodoo Swamp Witch's Tree of the Dead, and it's just some vines and wood. Took some smaller vines and come across this area here and draped some netting over it. These were some skulls that I had picked up from Goodwill. They were pretty cheesy at the time, and I just sprayed some rubberized coating on them and then wiped them all off once it started to dry to give this effect. And then hung half of them with rope, put the other half up here. The idea behind this is that these are souls that she's trapped throughout the years. The ones up top, she managed to trap the souls, and she bound the eyes. These got away and they hang below. And then she's adding more to her list over here, and the small graves that are scattered about behind the Tree of the Dead are the rest of the bodies of all these souls that she managed to trap or not trap. So the wall is actually rebar in the ground. It's about a 7-foot piece of rebar. It's about 2 foot in the ground, and then I have PVC over the top of it. And then I used a T-connector at the top, and I got this braided cable here, which goes down to an anchor in the ground, and it goes up into the T to the next one all the way around and anchors back down at the other side. And that was just a means to keep the material up. I could have made something far more rigid, but I didn't think that there was a need for it, and it would have been a ton of PVC. And then I would have had to have perfectly measured out each segment to put a piece in between, whereas with the cable, I could move the poles wherever I needed to, as long as I was within the 100-foot length of the material, and then anchor them down into the ground like this. And it didn't take a lot of tensile strength up top to hold the weight of this material, because you can see they're actually pretty slack right now, but it was just enough that it would hold its shape and give me something to anchor to at the top. So thanks for checking out the 2020 Swamp Witch Haunt by Holy City Haunters. Like us on Instagram, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave comments down below of any suggestions or anything you saw that you liked. We'd appreciate it. Thanks.